speaking to senior advocate Harish Salve, who is now been nominated also to a committee that has been set up by the government of India with regard to the one nation, one election policy. Will India have simultaneous elections for the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies? That is what this committee may be looking into. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Salve, for speaking to India today. If we can get some idea, sir, what exactly are the terms of reference of this committee? What are the issues that you're really going to be looking into, sir?
Right now, it's too early, Aneesha. We haven't taken stock of all the issues that arise. Fortunately, we are not starting from ground zero. There are law commissions, there are election commissions reports.
Gee.
We will have the advantage of a lot of groundwork which has already gone in.
Gee.
And broadly, the issues will be in two dimensions which are of relevance to us. The third, I would feel, doesn't concern us. The two dimensions are the exigencies and the efficiencies, cost and administrative, of having coordinated elections versus the present situation in which we are in a constant state of elections. The second will be the legal and constitutional angle as to whether there are any bars or impediments. I mean, as you all know, the only problem is caused really by midterm dissolutions, and then the whole calendar goes awry. Because once you're out of sync, you're always out of sync. So can we have a shorter term elections? Can we have elections only for interregnums? Can we, or is it necessary to have elections every time for the full 5 years? Does it require constitutional amendments? Would the statutory amendments suffice? I mean, these are the kind of issues which will arise. And of course, I start by saying there are strong views for and against. My personal view has been for, and I have been public about it, vocal about it. But if I'm on a committee like this, I remain open to be persuaded that this should not be done. And we will obviously hear points of view from all sides.
Sir, if I may ask, you said there are 2 points that you're talking about. The third, according to you, is not relevant. What is this third point that you mentioned?
That is the political controversy on whether it's a political advantage or not. I don't understand politics. I've never fought an election and hopefully never will. So I don't know how that works.
Sir, if I may ask this question, you mentioned, of course, that there have been law commission reports. You mentioned that there have been other committees. There was of course, the 1999 law commission report. There was the 2015 parliamentary standing committee report, and the Niti Aayog has also looked into this issue in 2018. All of whom have raised the similar issues that you just talked about with regard to requirement of amendments, whether that can be dispensed with, what kind of schedule can be followed. But the one point all of them seem to be agreeing upon is that there are specific constitutional provisions that may need to be amended, and for that there will need to be consensus. How do you see this? How do you see a way out of this, sir? Because constitutionally there are...
It's early days yet, and quite frankly, I did not know about this. I got to know from a congratulations message received from a news channel.
Okay.
Therefore, what I want to, at this stage, it is very difficult for me to give any concrete answers to this, because this will require a lot of thinking, and which we will do in the fullness of time. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind there are two dimensions to this. One is as I said, if you have a breakdown, you have president's rule imposed, you have the assembly dissolved. If the assembly is dissolved, then the constitution requires that the president's rule be limited in point of time, and a new assembly has to be put in place, which is what then puts it out of sync forever till you go on. So can you have Now, if you decide that, all right, we dissolve the assembly, but it will be a pro tem dissolution, and the next government will pick up in coordination. So it will be an assembly of a shorter tenure or shorter term. That may require a constitutional amendment. Or if you decide that, all right, if an assembly is, I'm just saying there are so many permutations, combinations. If there's less than 1 year to run
Of course.
of an assembly or 2 years to run, can you, in such a case, have an extended precedence rule?
So one issue in that is also the fact that in the last several years, we've seen a lot of political issues coming up in various states where we've had assemblies being dissolved, we've had MLAs breaking away, we've had new governments being formed. I mean, there are states in this country which have seen almost 3 governments in the last 3 years alone. So how does this entire issue of one nation, one election then
That's what I'm saying.
Coordinate with the political reality of the country?
That's what I'm saying. With now with the divided polity and razor thin margins, is there some way of getting around this? Is there a minimum term prescribed for the assembly, or how do we deal with this? And it's there are problems on both ways.
Mr. Salve, we were talking about the various issues that because of the political realities of this country, because we've seen several states that have seen multiple governments in the last few years alone. How do you see these dichotomies of political reality and constitutional mandate of having that an assembly has to have the house has to have a 5-year term? You can't dissolve you can't extend the term, you can't reduce the term of a house.
See, these are areas in which we will have to see whether there are any constitutional amendments or whether there are any exceptions. And one way around it may be that if you have these kind of situations, then and if fresh elections are forced upon you, then you have them till the next election.
Okay.
So you don't put it out of sync forever. Okay. And you have a truncated period.
But can constitutionally India have a truncated period?
Why not? Why not? Why not? This is not basic structure.
No, as in the sense that when there is an elected government, because there was a dissolution of the government, say for because of a no confidence motion,
there is
or MLA.
See, nobody has a vested right in any period. These are all ultimately, there is only one guiding factor, solitary guiding factor. What's in public interest?
Okay.
What is best for the nation?
Okay. We
have to see the arguments for and against. Also, what happens is some things are few and far between. Okay. You may have had 3 instances of real political instability or falling of governments. How many governments have actually fallen short of? See, change of political party is not relevant. Okay. What happened in Madhya Pradesh, what happened in Maharashtra, one party resigns, another comes in. That has nothing to do with the life of the assembly. The problem arises when an assembly has to be dissolved.
Okay.
That is what throws the elections out of sync. I mean, the new Maharashtra government gets as much time as remains in the rest of the life of the assembly. They don't get 5 years from the day they are sworn in.
Of course.
Life of the assembly is from election to election. So for that, we have to see how many, also empirically, how many governments have actually fallen in the past. If they've been few and far between, then it doesn't really matter if you have a law which says in those odd cases, in those extremely unusual cases, elections will be held only for the remaining period, because at some point you need to get everything back in sync. The cost of multiple elections, both as far as administrative costs are concerned, the outlay constantly one after the other, you're holding elections. the mobilization. The mobilization is the same if it is only a parliamentary election or if it is a state election. Mobilization is the same. So you have a mobilization every year instead of once in 5 years. The policy cost, every time you have an election in one or two states, those states have to declare the model code. Model code means for 3 months no decision making. And some decision making then becomes highly controversial. Because if you take a decision at the national level, it may affect elections at a state level. And if 3 states are at election, then you make a major policy announcement. The opposition screams murder, saying, "Hey, you're querying the pitch," and maybe to some extent they're right. You are querying the pitch. So, are these more important considerations, or is it more important that the assembly must have a 5-year life inevitably? Now, these are just issues which need to be considered. Maybe the committee comes down on the side of one or the other.
Okay.
I'm sure
So
we have people with differing points of view, and we will all have to hear each other out. We'll have to hear the rest of whatever the chairman of the committee decides, the modalities. We'll have to hear people out. And then,
has the chairman of the committee brought out any modalities? Is there any terms of reference?
48 hours, Aneesha.
Ji?
It's been 48 hours over a weekend.
Ji. So has there been any communication from the committee
Nothing
within the
has
committee
yet.
committee members?
I'm sure the committee will have a office and a sort of a secretariat. That will be the first step. Then the secretariat will set out. We'll have to have an initial meeting with the committee and make up a list of how we proceed, how we decide to go ahead. I'm sure the president, with his experience and his and the assistance which he may get, may draw up a roadmap for how we need to go ahead. And we will have a meeting. So I'm sure all this will happen. And the government has requested us to give a report early. So we will be getting on to it. I'm sure there are already people on the drawing board trying to see how best we can get the committee to move.
The government has called for a special session of the parliament on September 18th to 22nd. There's a lot of speculation about this issue and possibly being on the agenda of the parliament at that time.
It is not for me to speculate about what the session is. I find it unlikely for the reason, if the government was going to bring a bill for securing this, then they wouldn't need a committee.
Okay.
There is no way in which we can give a report before 18th of September.
Of course.
Correct? So I don't know whether this special session is for this or it's for something else. If the government expects us to do something. Thirdly, this is purely an executive action of the government. They have appointed a committee. This committee has no, in that sense, legal status beyond being a committee appointed by the executive. We will give our report. The report will be then processed through parliamentary channels, depending on whether the executive government brings a bill to amend the constitution, to amend the law, to bring something, and then it will hit parliament. And that's the stage at which parliament will consider it. So I don't think at this stage, the appointment of the committee is something which will be debated in parliament. I mean, somebody may raise an issue as to why the government is doing this, and it may get into a discussion on that. But I would be surprised if the agenda is primarily this. It may be that the parliament, maybe that parliament comes into place. I see the likelihood that because parliament is now going to come into place, the minister may be advised to inform the parliament of the information of the committee. The matter of propriety, that may lead to some debate discussion, but I don't think this could be the primary purpose. I mean, I have no idea why the session has been called. Look, seems unlikely.
Okay. So, if I may just ask this again, that the political aspect of it all, the opposition, of course, is pointing fingers at the government. They're saying that this is this is an attempt to sort of centralize power. This is something that will neglect local issues. That there may be. This is trying to affect the state elections. This is something that will require, of course, if a constitutional amendment is required, which is something that the Law Commission, the Parliamentary Standing Committee, as well as the Niti Aayog had said that would be required in several articles of the Constitution, will need an amendment, particularly the articles dealing with the duration of the House, the dissolution of the House, the president's rule aspects. So the opposition, of course, is taking this as a political ploy to divert attention from other issues. How do you see the political controversy that is currently brewing?
For those who are better versed in politics and who belong to the political system, they will reply to this. I don't belong to the political system. I don't understand politics, and it's not my job to reply to this.
Okay. But since you do belong to the legal field and you're one of the people who's considered
legally, these are non-issues. To say that some issues will get neglected or will not get neglected is all a matter of campaigning, and is all a matter of what you want to put on the central table. Yes, it may have political repercussions, or no, it may not have political repercussions. I think if it is better for the nation to have elections altogether, then it may make electioneering more difficult, would be a factor to be taken into account. But for me personally, as a lawyer, I don't understand that, and I don't know how relevant that will be.
So you have a considerable experience also in international law. You have also seen the way law works in other countries. Of course, in the UK, as you are Queen's Counsel, well, now King's Counsel, but in other countries, they do have simultaneous elections. Is that something that you or the committee would be looking at? How simultaneous elections are held in other countries of the world?
Of course,
what impact it may have?
Of course, we have to see. Other countries have had problems with very volatile politics, which has led to very short-term governments. Italy, you've seen how many governments have fallen, and all these problems are there. That's why some countries prefer the presidential form, in which there is a greater degree of stability. Now, we have a federal model, quasi-federal model, in which we have the states as constituents of the union. So, consistent with this, we will have to see ultimately what works for us the best. I mean, in a country like United Kingdom, you can't compare any of the problems here with the problems in India. The size is different. The homogeneity is different. I mean, what you talk of, the diaspora and disparities in the UK, nothing compared to what we have in India. The kind of differences we have, and the diversity. The diversity here is hardly worth mentioning compared to the Indian diversity. By and large, this is a homogeneous country. So that's why we have to see. Of course, we will see what goes on elsewhere, but ultimately, it has to be appropriate. It has to be relevant for the Indian genius and the Indian system. And that's what we will be looking at primarily.
Just one last question. So, emanating from what you just said about other countries, some countries, of course, have the presidential system, and the opposition parties in India are saying that is what the BJP is basically aiming at, to sort of centralize the system, to change the structure of Indian politics and Indian constitutional democracy. How do you see these allegations that have been raised by the opposition, if you may?
Again, I do not know what BJP intends to do. I do not know what is on the agenda. Theoretically, should India have a presidential form of government is not something which has been discussed for the first time. This issue has come up before, and it will come up again. That is not what we are supposed to debate, and that is not in our remit.
Okay.
Beyond which, if somebody has any political aspirations of doing something, that again, people who are in political parties will debate. It's not for us.
All right, sir. Thank you very much for speaking to India Today. Thank you very much for giving us this much of an insight into the issues involved. Mr. Harish Salve, thank you very much for speaking to India Today.